Hi, it's Wyndham. A client asked me the other day, can self-judgment ever be a force for good? Really interesting question. And I had a sense immediately of what I thought about that. But clearly, as a coach, it's not about what I think, it's about what my clients think. So I asked them what they thought. And they essentially landed on the idea that, well, self-judgment can propel you forward. And I 100% agree. It can drive us forward. The question, though, is what are we judging and why? So if we're talking a comparative with somebody else, then what is it about that drives judgment in ourselves? Because self-judgment, I believe, is a criticism. It's a criticism of ourselves. We frame it in a way that there is something lacking in us. And often it's a comparator, but not always. Sometimes it's well, you said you were going to do this, you were going to achieve this, you were going to drive for that, and you failed. You useless, insert whatever you like. And I know that feeling because I spent 20 years looking in a mirror, and that sounds very vain. That's not what I mean. But over 20 years, I didn't like what I saw in the mirror, and I had huge self-criticism, huge self-judgment. And for me, it didn't propel me forward. It created an ever greater sense of lack. But it can drive you forward. I know people who their self-criticism is a fuel for pushing themselves harder and harder and harder. And as a result, things happen, right? They achieve things, they help others achieve things, they create things. But, deliberate use of but, when we use criticism in that way, as a fuel, the process we go through is almost universally miserable. So we are then entirely dependent on the outcome we are aiming for, creating all the meaning in our lives. And we know the story has been told so many times of people who seem to have it all are some of the most miserable, because the thing in itself, the achievement we're aiming for, the thing we're trying to attain, is not going to fill the void that creates the self-judgment, the self-criticism. It just isn't. And so even when we use our self-judgment as a fuel, as a driver, as a motivator to create, to push, to achieve, we're still going to have to come back. We're going to have to come home and spend time with that part of us that is judging us. And when has that part of us ever been satisfied? When we have that internal self-judgment, that is a criticism, it is a conflict internally. And until we resolve that, we will always be one step away or one step behind this sense of not being enough, of whatever we do not being enough. And oh my God, that is exhausting. So what do you think? Can self-judgment ever be a force for good? But who's good? And ultimately, you only get to live one life, your life. And if your life is a perpetual cycle of judgment, miserable effort, achievement, empty achievement, self-judgment, miserable effort, achievement, empty achievement, then what do you really want in life? Because the pattern you are following, the pattern I followed for decades is not creating what you really want. Didn't create what I wanted. All I wanted to be in life was happy. Slightly naive, but it was so important to me because I was so unhappy. But I kept doing the same things. And the things I was doing were creating the outcomes they were creating, not what I wanted instead. So final point from me on, can self-judgment be a force for good? It can, but not for you. Not for the person who is carrying the judgment. And there may be points in our lives where our suffering leads to greater good elsewhere. Absolutely, that can be true. And if we are deeply connected with that greater good, and that greater good becomes a deep motivator for us, and we are intimately looking to achieve that greater good, then the suffering we feel in the work we are required to do to achieve it doesn't have to be accompanied by self-judgment. It changes it completely if we can connect to the meaning behind the suffering. Then the suffering is lessened. It's not removed, of course it's not, but an angle of suffering, that self-judgment, that lack of worth, that criticism, that incompleteness, that part of the suffering can be mitigated, can be removed. You may be able to hear that. That's my cat scratching at the door. I leave you with that. Can you get to a point where it isn't self-criticism, where you have failed or you believe there is more you could do, recognizing it just for that? I did not achieve what I had set out to. That's okay. Can I get connected and understand why? Well, why didn't I? Okay, well, maybe I didn't actually show up every day in the way I would need to in order to achieve that thing. Okay, what am I going to do now? Am I going to go again? And if I am going to go again, am I going to do the things I didn't do the last time? Am I connected deeply enough to the meaning I am trying to create through this mechanism, whatever it might be? Because if I am much more likely to take the difficult steps, the suffering path, because I understand why. I understand what I'm trying to create. And in understanding what I'm trying to create, the judgment goes away. Not permanently, it will always try to come back in, but we are then, I don't really like the term armed, because it sounds like we're in a fight, but we are skilled. We have the tools then to recognize when that old thinking snaps back and go, whoa, I'm not doing that anymore because I know I'm enough. We will walk this path, and the path is the point. Eventually we'll get to where we're going, and then we can see how rewarding it is or not. But my failures along the way are simply part of the process. I leave you with that. I wish you a peaceful and joyful few days, and I will speak to you soon.